The gavel did not merely fall within the stone walls of the High Court of Justice in London. It detonated. At precisely 1400 hours Greenwich Mean Time, a singular, catastrophic vibration was sent through the transatlantic fiber optic cables, shattering the carefully constructed illusion of the Sussex Empire. This was not just a legal defeat. It was a financial execution order, signed in invisible ink. While the world was distracted by the superficial headlines of a dismissed appeal, a far more dangerous reality was unfolding in the encrypted channels between London and California. Sir Matthew Nicklin did not simply refuse Prince Harry the right to challenge the decision regarding his police protection. He mandated a punishment that few saw coming. The order was absolute. The Duke of Sussex must immediately liquidate 90% of the opposing side's legal fees. We are talking about a sum that exceeds 1.5 million United States dollars, and he has to pay it now. But here is the detail that the mainstream press missed. The detail that turns this courtroom drama into a Shakespearean tragedy of resources and revenge. Moments after the ruling was delivered, a secure line was activated from Montecito. It was a desperate, scrambling attempt to reach the one man who could authorize a bailout, King Charles III. The request was specific: a bridge loan to cover the court mandate and prevent the humiliation of asset seizure on American soil. However, the voice that answered the call was not the warm baritone of a father, but the icy silence of a bureaucracy that has been instructed to close the vault. And the person holding the combination to that vault is no longer the king. For 5 years, Prince Harry has operated under the assumption that the Bank of Pa would always remain open, regardless of the insults hurled from across the ocean. He believed that blood was thicker than ink. He was wrong. Intelligence from deep within the corridors of Kensington Palace suggests that the request for funds was intercepted before it ever reached the sovereign's desk. The response, drafted by the rigid comptrollers of the Duchy of Cornwall and authorized by the Prince of Wales, was devastatingly brief. There would be no transfer. There would be no safety net. The message was clear. The Duchy is not a slush fund for private litigation. This is the moment the tectonic plates shifted. Prince William has effectively placed an embargo on his own brother. Consider the optics of the situation. In London, Prince William was photographed looking every bit the global statesman, shaking hands with dignitaries, his smile tight but composed, the face of a man who has cleaned house. Meanwhile, 6,000 miles away, inside the olive green gates of the Montecito mansion, panic reportedly set in. Meghan Markle, the Duchess who has meticulously curated an image of untouchable success, was faced with the terrifying prospect of insolvency. With a $2 million annual security bill and media contracts that are drying up like a desert creek, this new debt is not just a nuisance, it is an existential threat. The Sussexes are not liquid. Their wealth is tied up in a mortgage that rivals the GDP of a small island nation and a lifestyle that demands perpetual income. The High Court has drained their accounts, but it is Prince William who has drained their hope. And as the sun sets over the Pacific, a terrifying question hangs in the humid air. If the king won't pay, and the prince won't pay, who owns Harry now? This is no longer a family spat. This is a siege, and the supplies are running out. The walls of Kensington Palace are thick enough to withstand a bombardment, but on this particular Tuesday, they were barely containing the seismic shock of the High Court's ruling. To the outside observer, the Royal Standard flag fluttered lazily in the wind, signaling business as usual. Yet, deep within the private administrative wings, the mood was vibrating with a specific frequency of cold fury. This was not the chaotic shouting match of a dysfunctional family dinner. It was the terrifying, disciplined silence of a corporation executing a hostile takeover defense. Prince William did not pace the floor when the news broke. Sources close to the heir indicate he sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing the summary of the judgment with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. For 5 years, he had watched his brother weaponize their mother's memory and the family's wealth to launch assaults on the very institutions William is sworn to protect. When the aide placed the verdict on his desk, confirming that Harry was now liable for 90% of the legal costs, William reportedly let out a single, sharp exhale. It was not a sigh of relief. It was a confirmation of justice. The reaction from the Prince of Wales was described by one insider as glacial. He reportedly turned to his private secretary and uttered a phrase that will likely never appear in the official court circulars, but will echo through history. He purchased this war. Now he must service the debt. But if you think this was merely a moment of sibling schadenfreude, you are missing the darker, more calculated strategy at play. William was not just reacting to a lawsuit, he was activating a protocol. Within 60 minutes of the ruling, a classified memorandum, let us call it the Red Directive, circulated through the encrypted channels of the Duchy of Cornwall. This document, shielded from public records laws, contained explicit instructions regarding the management of discretionary funds. The language was bureaucratic, but the intent was lethal. It effectively categorized Prince Harry's legal entanglements as high-risk personal liabilities rather than family matters. This distinction is crucial. It means that any attempt to siphon money from the estate to pay the Associated Newspaper's bill would be flagged as a misappropriation of funds. The radioactive fallout of this decision cannot be overstated. By locking the treasury, William has forced Harry into a corner where his only currency is his remaining secrets. The courtiers, the men in gray suits whom Diana once feared, are now moving with a synchronized efficiency to enforce this embargo. They have been preparing for this day. They knew that eventually, the Duke of Sussex would run out of legal arguments and start running up bills he could not pay. There was a moment, however, of near breach. Reports suggest that a direct line to King Charles at Highgrove was briefly active. It was Harry, bypassing 3 layers of security protocol, attempting to appeal to the father, not the king. He was pleading for a stay of execution on his finances, but the line was not clear. The gatekeepers were listening. The call was logged, the plea was noted, and the answer was silence. But why did the king, a man known for his sentimentality, allow his son to be thrown to the wolves? The answer lies in a secret agreement made 48 hours prior. The king's silence is not passivity. It is a delegation of authority. Charles is the head of state, but William is becoming the head of the family business. And the new CEO has decided that the days of bailouts are over. The bank is closed. The vault is sealed. And somewhere in California, the realization is setting in that the safety net they thought was made of steel was actually made of spider webs. To understand the brutality of the present, we must rewind the clock exactly 48 hours. The global media was fixated on a dazzling reception at Buckingham Palace, where foreign diplomats were drinking champagne and discussing climate protocols. The cameras were blinded by the diamonds and the medals. But while the flashbulbs were popping at the grand entrance, a black, unmarked sedan slipped unnoticed through the service gates of St. James's Palace, carrying a briefcase that contained the fate of the Sussex finances. This is the timeline the tabloids missed. The narrative that Prince William reacted to the verdict is a comfortable fiction. The truth is far colder. The palace knew. Intelligence suggests that 2 days prior to the public announcement, a risk assessment team comprising senior legal aides and treasury officials convened in a windowless room known as the Shadow Office. They had run the simulations. They had analyzed the mood of the judiciary. They concluded with near certainty that the High Court was about to dismantle Prince Harry's case. They did not just predict the loss. They predicted the desperate scramble for cash that would follow. And so, while Prince Harry was likely sleeping in Montecito, unaware of the approaching tsunami, London was already boarding up the windows. It was during this clandestine meeting that the strategy shifted from containment to isolation. The directive was issued to audit every potential financial conduit between the Crown and the Duke of Sussex. They checked the trust funds, the residual estate payouts, and the discretionary allowances. One by one, the switches were flipped to the off position. This was a preemptive strike of military precision. Consider the cruelty of the timing. While this financial blockade was being erected, Prince Harry's legal team in London was still projecting confidence, perhaps even drafting a victory statement. They were operating on outdated intelligence. They believed they were fighting a legal battle, unaware that their supply lines had already been cut by their own family. The service entrance narrative is critical here. While the world watched the king wave from a balcony, the real power was being exercised in the basement levels of the monarchy. A source indicates that a specific dossier was prepared for Prince William, titled simply with the code name Project Insolvency. This dossier laid out the grim reality of Harry's American life, the stagnant Netflix deals, the exorbitant security costs, and the lack of liquid assets. The palace analysts knew that $1 million legal bill would not just be an inconvenience, it would be a catastrophe. The trap was not the court ruling itself. The trap was the silence that preceded it. They let Harry walk into the courtroom believing he had a safety net, only to pull it away the moment he looked down. By the time the judge cleared his throat to read the verdict, the decision to deny the bridge loan had already been made, signed, and filed. The emergency call from Montecito was doomed before it was even dialed. The tragedy of Prince Harry is not that he lost a lawsuit, it is that he is playing checkers, while the institution that raised him is playing three-dimensional chess. He thought he was fighting for security, but in the 48 hours leading up to the judgment, he was actually losing his last connection to the royal vault. The timelines have merged. The past has strangled the future. And as the dust settles, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. The monarchy did not just win. They orchestrated the battlefield so that Harry could not possibly survive. Behind the velvet ropes and the gilded carriages lies the true engine of the monarchy, the Duchy of Cornwall. It is an ancient estate, a sprawling conglomerate of land and investments worth over £1 billion, but under the stewardship of Prince William, it has transformed into a weapon of financial discipline. This is where the enforcer resides. We are not talking about a single individual, but a collective consciousness of high-level accountants, lawyers, and courtiers whose loyalty is sworn not to the bloodline, but to the balance sheet. When the request for the bridge loan arrived from California, it did not go to a compassionate father. It landed on the desk of the comptroller. The comptroller is the embodiment of the Iron Hand. He operates in a world of rigid statutes and fiduciary duties. To him, Prince Harry is no longer the spare. He is a non-performing asset. The rejection was drafted with surgical precision. It cited the strict governance protocols that bind the duchy. These funds are designated for public duties, charitable endeavors, and the maintenance of the heir's household. There is no line item for foreign litigation or reputational damage control. To release over £1 million to pay a debt incurred by a private citizen, even a royal duke, would be a breach of trust. It would be, in the eyes of the enforcer, an act of embezzlement. This technicality is the blade that William is using to sever the final artery. By hiding behind the rigid laws of the estate, the Prince of Wales can deny his brother without ever having to say a word himself. The brutality of this move lies in its legality. William is not refusing to help out of spite. He is refusing because the rules forbid it. It is the ultimate bureaucratic checkmate. The enforcer has effectively classified Harry's legal crusade against the British press as a luxury hobby that the estate will no longer subsidize. Furthermore, let us analyze the specific mechanism of this punishment. The order from the High Court demands payment of 90% of the legal costs. In the past, such debts might have been quietly absorbed by the privy purse to avoid a scandal. But the new regime at Kensington Palace has adopted a zero-tolerance policy on bailouts. The message sent by the enforcer is terrifyingly simple. You wanted independence? Here is the invoice for it. We must also consider the psychological impact of this financial blockade. For his entire life, Harry has operated with a limitless safety net. The concept of insolvency was as foreign to him as poverty. But the enforcer has stripped away that immunity. By enforcing the letter of the law, William is forcing Harry to face a reality that no royal has faced in modern history: the possibility of having his personal assets seized. Imagine the humiliation of a prince of the realm having to liquidate his own home to pay a debt to a tabloid newspaper. This is the scenario the enforcer has engineered. The duchy is now a fortress with the drawbridge raised. The accountants have closed the ledgers. The lawyers have filed the paperwork. And Prince William, standing behind this wall of bureaucracy, remains untouchable. He has delegated the cruelty to the system, allowing the cold, hard logic of finance to do what emotional pleas never could: bring the runaway duke to his knees. The enforcer has spoken, and the verdict is final. There will be no transfer. The true battlefield of this conflict is not the courtroom. It is the mind. We are witnessing a clash of two distinct psychological doctrines: the weaponized silence of Kensington Palace versus the panic-driven noise of Montecito. In London, the strategy is defined by a terrifying stillness. Picture the Prince and Princess of Wales arriving at a gala for the diplomatic corps. The cameras flash, capturing Kate in the lover's knot tiara, a vision of unshakable continuity. William stands beside her, his posture relaxed, his engagement with the ambassadors genuine. To the untrained eye, nothing is wrong. But that is the point. This performance is the weapon. By refusing to acknowledge the legal catastrophe unfolding across the Atlantic, William and Kate are engaging in a brutal psychological operation. They are effectively erasing Harry from the narrative. There are no leaked quotes from friends, no defensive statements, no angry tweets, just business as usual. This gray rock method, a psychological term for dealing with narcissism by becoming as uninteresting as a rock, is driving the Sussex camp to the brink of madness. Silence, when you are begging for a reaction, is the loudest sound in the world. Cross the ocean, however, and the atmosphere shifts from a serene oil painting to a frantic reality television edit. The silence of London is being met with the cacophony of California. Inside the Montecito mansion, the air is thick with the smell of desperation and burning bridges. Sources paint a picture of a war room mentality. Meghan Markle, the architect of the Sussex brand, is reportedly calculating the damage to their liquidity and their reputation. The victim narrative requires a villain, but when the villain refuses to fight back and simply hands you a bill for legal costs, the narrative collapses. The panic in Montecito is not just about money. It is about relevance. Harry is described as pacing the corridors, trapped in a loop of indignation. He cannot understand why his truth has not set him free, but rather imprisoned him in debt. He is shouting into a void, expecting an echo, but hearing nothing. The couple is reportedly frantically brainstorming their next move, a new interview, a memoir sequel, a paparazzi walk. But here is the cruelty of the psychological dynamic. Every time they scream, they look weaker. Every time London stays silent, they look stronger. William understands a fundamental truth that Harry has forgotten. In the game of kings, the one who speaks first loses. By ignoring the bridge loan request and letting the lawyers handle the eviction of funds, William has reduced his brother from a rival to a nuisance. He is not angry. He is indifferent. And indifference is the one thing a celebrity cannot survive. The contrast is visceral. One side is playing for history, the other is playing for the next news cycle. But as the pressure mounts on the California coast, the psychological strain is creating cracks in the Sussex alliance. Whispers are beginning to circulate about the tension between the Duke and Duchess. Meghan, the pragmatist, realizes that a broke prince is a liability. Harry, the idealist, is realizing that his crusade has cost him his family. The psychological warfare has shifted from a battle between brothers to a battle for survival within the walls of their own home. London is sleeping soundly. Montecito is wide awake, and the realization is dawning on the exiles. You cannot win a war against an enemy who refuses to acknowledge you even exist. The silence from the palace is not empty. It is heavy, it is suffocating, and it is winning. History does not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. If you listen closely to the wind howling through the chimney stacks of the royal residences, you can hear the echoes of 1997. This legal defeat is not merely a financial blow. It is a spiritual crisis that exhumes the deepest trauma of the House of Windsor. Prince Harry did not walk into that courtroom to save money on security. He walked in to slay a dragon. For decades, he has carried the conviction that the British press murdered his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales. Every lawsuit, every witness statement, every angry glare at a camera lens is an attempt to rewrite that tragic night in Paris. He believes that if he can defeat the tabloids now, he can retroactively save her. But the High Court verdict has shattered that fantasy. By ruling against him, the legal system has effectively told him that his crusade is not a holy war, but a procedural error. The ghost of Diana is screaming through the hallways of his mind. She was the original insurgent, the first to go to war with the men in gray suits. She, too, found herself isolated, stripped of her HRH style, and scrambling for control over her own narrative. In his desperation to protect his wife from suffering his mother's fate, Harry has inadvertently recreated the exact conditions of Diana's final years. Isolated from the family, paranoid about security, and financially entangled with entities that do not care about his bloodline. However, there is another ghost haunting this narrative, one whose silence is even more deafening than Diana's screams. It is the shadow of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty operated on a simple, ruthless maxim: never complain, never explain. It was the armor that kept the monarchy safe for 70 years. Harry threw that armor into the Atlantic Ocean. He traded the dignity of silence for the currency of truth. Now, as the bills pile up, the wisdom of his grandmother looms large. She understood that the moment a royal starts selling their soul for approval, they become a commodity, and commodities fluctuate in value. The tragedy for Prince William is perhaps the most Shakespearean of all. He made a promise to his mother to look after his younger brother. They were supposed to be the boys against the world. But the crown is a jealous mistress. It demands total loyalty. To protect the institution that his grandmother built and his father now leads, William has had to break the promise he made to his mother. He has had to choose the survival of the monarchy over the survival of his brother's ego. This is the hidden cost of the court ruling. It is not just about the £1.2 million. It is about the final severance of the brotherhood. The bond that was forged, walking behind a gun carriage in 1997, has been dissolved by wire transfers and legal briefs. The irony is cruel and absolute. Harry fled the United Kingdom to escape the goldfish bowl of royal life, only to find himself drowning in a much smaller, much more expensive tank. He is fighting ghosts, but the ghosts are winning. The legacy of the past is not a shield, it is a weight. And as he stares at the legal judgment, Harry must realize that he cannot litigate his grief away. The check he has to write to Associated Newspapers is a receipt for a battle that was lost 25 years ago. The tragedy is not that he is broke. The tragedy is that he is still that 12-year-old boy, throwing stones at a tank, while the rest of his family has moved on. We have arrived at the precipice. The legal bills are merely the tremors before the earthquake. If the Duke of Sussex cannot satisfy the High Court's demand for payment, and if the king continues to withhold the funds from the duchy, we enter uncharted territory, the bankruptcy of a prince of the blood. This is the doomsday scenario that keeps the courtiers awake at 3 a.m. A financially insolvent Prince Harry is not just a personal tragedy. He is a national security threat. When a man with high-level clearance, intimate knowledge of state secrets, and a direct line to the head of state becomes desperate for cash, he becomes vulnerable. Intelligence agencies call this a compromised asset. Imagine the headlines if the Montecito mansion is foreclosed. Imagine the humiliation of a royal duke appearing on reality television not for charity, but for a paycheck to clear a debt. But the danger goes deeper. If the traditional revenue streams dry up the streaming deals, the publishing advances, what commodity does Harry have left to sell? He has one asset remaining, and it is the nuclear option that could incinerate the House of Windsor. The final secrets. There are whispers of a second memoir, a manuscript that contains the details too explosive for the first book, conversations about the king's health, private disagreements between Kate and William, the unchecked rumors that have circulated on the internet but never in print. If Harry is backed into a corner, forced to choose between poverty and betrayal, will he pull the trigger? This is the terrifying calculus for King Charles. A broke Harry is a dangerous Harry. He becomes a gun for hire. Could we see a prince sponsored by foreign oligarchs? Could we see the Sussex brand pivoting to endorse products that degrade the dignity of the crown? The palace is acutely aware of this risk. Their response to this scorched earth potential is currently being drafted in the constitutional chambers of Parliament. If Harry threatens to monetize the final secrets, the monarchy will have no choice but to initiate the nuclear option of their own, the total removal of titles and the erasure of his place in the line of succession. This would require an act of Parliament, a move unprecedented in modern history. It would be a legislative amputation. The debate is already happening behind closed doors. Is it safer to keep him inside the tent pissing out, or outside the tent pissing in? The High Court ruling suggests the establishment has chosen the latter. They are betting that Harry's credibility is so eroded that even his biggest bombs will fail to detonate. But this is a gamble of historic proportions. If they strip him of everything, he has nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is capable of burning down the village just to feel the warmth. The doomsday scenario posits that the financial collapse of the Sussexes will trigger a fire sale of royal intimacy, leading to a constitutional crisis that could force the king to abdicate or the institution to fundamentally fracture. We are watching a game of chicken played with the legacy of a 1,000-year-old institution. One side has the money, the other side has the matches. And the ground is covered in gasoline. The curtain falls, but the play is far from over. As the ink dries on the High Court's judgment, a new and far more insidious threat is rising from the mist, one that threatens to revoke the very sanctuary Prince Harry has claimed. We must turn our eyes to the United States Department of Homeland Security. Until now, the Duke of Sussex has lived in America under the protection of a diplomatic halo. But halos fade. Legal experts are now quietly debating a terrifying technicality, the public charge rule. United States immigration law is notoriously unforgiving to non-citizens who demonstrate a risk of becoming a financial burden on the state. With a debt of over £1 million hanging over his head in the United Kingdom, and reports of cash flow issues in California, Prince Harry's financial profile is beginning to flash red on the screens of immigration officers. Combine this with the ongoing pressure from conservative think tanks regarding his admission of drug use in his memoir, and you have the ingredients for the ultimate humiliation, the revocation of his visa. Imagine the irony. The prince who fled his country for freedom could be deported back to the very cage he escaped, not as a royal returnee, but as a failed immigrant. If he is forced to return to British soil, he returns not to a palace, but to a legal and social wilderness. He would be a man without a country, stripped of his American dream and locked out of his British birthright. So, we are left with the question that will define the next decade of the Windsor saga. The walls are closing in, the bank accounts are draining, the allies are silent. Prince Harry stands alone on the bluffs of Montecito, looking out at an ocean that is too wide to swim. He has one card left to play. It is the card he swore he would never use. But desperation changes a man's moral compass. Will he sell the final secrets? Somewhere in a fireproof safe, there are likely journals, recordings, and memories that could shatter the reign of King Charles before it has truly begun. If the choice is between financial ruin and betraying his father one last time, what will the spare do? Prince William knows this. That is why he is not celebrating. He is waiting. He knows that a wounded animal is the most dangerous creature in the forest. The High Court has fired a shot, but they have not killed the beast. They have only backed it into a corner. As the screen fades to black, we do not see a resolution. We see a fuse burning down to the powder keg. The monarchy has drawn a line in the sand. Harry has run out of runway. The collision is inevitable. The only uncertainty remaining is who will survive the crash.